Mhm. Hi, everyone, and hello, Robin. My name is Maria Coriel Martin. I'm the founder of Art Toolkit, and I'm so thrilled to have you all here today joining us with amazing artist and naturalist Robin Carlson. Oh, let me get that muted here. There we go. Yeah, Robin, so happy to have you here. You are an artist, a naturalist, an author, who's been exploring all sorts of natural places. We've shared your book previously on our newsletter and socials, which is really inspiring. You'll have to tell us a little more about that later for anyone who's unfamiliar with it. But you've created just a whole variety of natural arts, from interpretive panels, posters, your own sketchbooks, species and habitat information cards, and even playground equipment. So you've really got your head into exploring nature through art and all sorts of different avenues. And today we're just so excited to have you here to share a little more about your work and guide us through a little sketching together.
Thanks so much. I'm so excited to be here. I'm so grateful for the invitation to join you. And just want to say that I'm a huge fan of your own artwork and your inspirational work, field sketching, and also for your, generous, really generous model for running a business as well. So thank you so much for having me today.
Oh, those are warm words. Thank you. Well, I'll be here today keeping an eye on the chat. So those of you joining us live, if you have questions at any time, would love to hear them, and I'll help relay them to Robin. And Robin, do you want to get started and share with us a little bit of your background and how you got into your sketching and naturalist practice?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out, all of my education was in biology, mostly specifically in evolutionary biology, because what I am still the most interested in is processes of change in the natural world. And so I started out on the really big evolutionary time scale, but decided that I didn't want to be an academic biologist, and that I really wanted to be able to learn about a much broader array of topics, and especially also to then translate what I was learning for a more popular audience as well. And so what I did for a long time after I got my master's degree was to work in stream habitat restoration for salmon in California, sort of looking at, again, ecological change on a much smaller time frame, looking at what we can do to make streams healthier than many of them have become for the salmon and the other things that live in them. But that whole time I've always done field sketching. I've always kept a notebook. I always have one with me at all times, and had always been doing artwork of various kinds as a hobby, as sort of my primary and most important way of engaging with the world around me. And as time went by working on the stream restoration projects, a lot of my work then was about communicating what was happening with these projects. And I started thinking more and more about how much I really wanted to focus on visual communication and use my artwork as my primary communication tool. And so I decided to make the change to become a natural science illustrator, and started doing posters and interpretive panels and things like that. But then I also wanted to continue to focus on change in the natural world. And so I sort of had two big interests. One was to follow change in a particular place over time. And the other one was to really look at using field sketches themselves as the primary tool for reaching out to people, not finished illustrations, which of course I love doing, and those are important, but also these immediate direct sketches that communicate what I was feeling at the time when I was out there, because I think that that's a really, really powerful communication tool. And I think that I can communicate things that way that I can't any other way. And so when a University of California natural reserve very close to my home burned in 2015, it didn't immediately occur to me, but fairly shortly after that, I realized this is a place that's going to be changing rapidly over time now, responding to that fire. And it's a place that's open to the public. I know I can visit it regularly, so I'm going to go with a sketchbook, and I'm just going to document everything I see changing. And I went into it not knowing a huge amount about fire ecology. That was definitely not one of my primary topics of study before that point. So I thought, this is great. I'm going to learn huge amounts of new stuff. I'm coming into this with really fresh, open eyes, and I'm just going to follow this over time. And so that started in 2015. I tried to go monthly, did that for 5 years, and then started thinking about what I could do to sort of put what I'd been learning out into the world. And so that's, excuse me, what turned into the Cold Canyon Fire Journals book. And I hadn't necessarily intended to do the kind of sort of natural history writing that I did in that. And so the process of also realizing that I was able to write in a literary and popular way to communicate the science alongside my sketches was a exciting evolution as well.
Yeah, it's an interesting circle. And I mean, I agree with you so much about the immediacy of field sketches. I remember seeing work by Thomas Moran that he did in the field, going out and sketching before our national parks were created, like Yellowstone, I think, and Yosemite. And it feels like just looking over someone's shoulder where it's through their eyes, there's this filter and immediacy. And I love that you started with your science practice and then came around and you're now on more of the almost science communication, but still really having your feet grounded in both. And a friend of mine who is a scientist shared with me that once a beautiful quote of, in her words, of the similarities between art and science, how both set out to interpret and inspire and, share our natural world. And so I think they're just intrinsically linked through observation and curiosity.
Yeah, I absolutely think that there's important things that we just can't communicate any other way, and so it's really exciting to be able to put all of that out there. And it's also been, I mean, sort of the reason that I decided that it was such a powerful tool for communication is because it's definitely the sketchbook work, the unfinished stuff, the really immediate first thoughts of artists that I'm most interested in. Finished artwork is lovely, but I really, really love seeing people's sketchbooks more than anything else.
Yeah, they're like self-portraits of people, of our different experiences and, a record of what we might see and notice, or also how we're feeling and can capture all of that. And I'm just a huge fan, and folks who have been with Art Toolkit for a while have certainly heard me say this, of just practice, not perfection. And that sketchbook is really a practice, and that space to explore and try things and record what we see and experience. But it's not about chasing perfect. It's getting down that immediacy, that moment.
Yeah, and I think that the imperfect parts are really what conveys the life that we're seeing around us. An absolutely perfect photorealistic drawing, I think, doesn't have the kinds of life that something with the imperfections that crept in because you were out there in the field living the experience. I think it really conveys life in a different way.
Oh, beautifully said, Robin. Well, tell us a little bit about what you have to share with us today.
Yeah, so what I wanted to do was sort of go through a little bit of the philosophy that I have when I'm out in the field sketching, so that especially in a place where it's familiar to me, but I'm trying each time to go with really open eyes and look for changes, look for new things that have sprung up since the last time I was there. So we're going to draw just a few different things that might be representative of a visit that I took to Cold Canyon, which is where I followed fire ecology. We're going to look at an inky cap mushroom, a hare's foot ink cap that I stumbled upon on a hike in the spring, and it was lit by the sun and glowing, and it's just this sort of really obvious, perfect sketching subject. But then I want to sort of talk about, while I draw it, how I then try not to just focus on that one thing, but then bring in the other aspects of the environment around it, so that my sketchbook is a record not just of individual things that I saw, but how they fit into the world around them. So we'll also look at just some examples of something moving, a few butterflies that I have pictures of them in motion, and then one of their host plants, a miniature lupine, which is something that I see a lot of and saw a lot of after the fire, because lupines are definitely very happy in recently burned environments.
That's one of my personal favorites, wildflowers, of how the leaves of the lupine capture those little drops of water in the middle that look like little gems.
Yes.
Well, show us your desktop, and you can
great.
give us a little look-see at what you have ready. And those of you who have your sketchbook with you can follow along. I've got some of my basic materials in front of me from my well-loved here Pocket Art Toolkit and pens. So I'll be sketching along too, Robin.
Great. So I'll just quickly explain what I'm going to be using for the demo. So I definitely don't always use this pen. It's the Pentel Pocket Brush Pen. I use it in the field sometimes, not all the time, but I do love it for demonstrations like this because it shows up really well on the camera. And it is actually absolutely perfect for the ink cap mushroom and its lines, all those variable, beautiful black lines on the top of that mushroom. So I'll be using this pen and then a really limited palette because I try to travel really light. When I'm out in the field, I don't take a ton of colors. I am not trying to reproduce every color I see exactly, but very much going for the overall feeling and life of what I'm doing. And I like to, not spend a huge amount of time thinking about which color to use, but just use them freely and let them mix on my page. So those will be the two primary things that I'm using, and I'm just going to get started drawing. I'm going to start with the tall mushroom on the far left. And I'm going to really let the brush pen in this case sort of echo again, those incredibly beautiful sculptural lines along this mushroom. So this, it's a hare's foot ink cap. It's called that because
Minute.
before,
Robin, I'll just interrupt you one moment.
Yeah.
I'll post in our chat the link to the images that we have here. So if anyone wants to check these out, these are in the description of our video. And so you can pull this up on a screen if you'd like to look at these. And then I do just have a nice question from Mary that I'll relate to you as well, Robin, which Mary says, the one thing that intimidates me is that artists always seem to know the names of what they are drawing or painting. Do you look them up after you get home? A great question.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. And that was actually truly one of my main goals when I first started this project of sketching regularly at Cold Canyon, which was that I have a long academic background in biology, but my sort of basic naturalist knowledge of any place in particular, and certainly of this place, was fairly limited at that point. And so one of the other huge benefits and reasons that I wanted to do this project was to come to know really well all of the different species that live in this place. And so absolutely, when I first went out, drawing what I saw and, trying to observe things with really open eyes, I didn't know what I was looking at all. And so I was doing a lot of drawings and taking a lot of pictures of, tons of wildflowers and insects and all sorts of things that I didn't know what they were. I was drawing them and, really trying to pay attention to details in the act of drawing. And then also taking photographs of everything that I drew too, taking photographs to take home and then using that time at home to learn all of the species. And so I also didn't use any of those apps where you can just have it look at the photograph you took and tell you what you might have there. I used species lists for the area and image searches on Google so that I had to really follow the investigative process of sort of guessing what I might have and looking at images to see if that was correct. And so I absolutely, it's not critical at all that you know what you're looking at or know what you're drawing in the field, and doing the drawing and looking at things really closely is a fantastic way to start to learn about what's out there.
But you brought up a wonderful point, which there are some incredible naturalist apps now. And I think the one I might use is iNaturalist. Maybe I'll have to look it up and we can, or if there's one you like, Robin, we can post in the comments, where it can incredibly take a photo and make suggestions of what you're looking at.
Yeah. So again, since I don't actually use, I use iNaturalist a lot to find out what species are in an area, but then I just use the images that are posted there and make myself sort through them and don't let an app tell me what it is, because I learn a lot by sort of guessing at the features that I think are important and using those to figure out what I'm looking at. But those apps can be also a great way to start if you are not feeling confident about where you would even start looking to find out what something is.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I still enjoy puzzling through my bird books, and that exploratory process can lead you down some interesting pathways too of learning about your subjects.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm using my pen to just follow all of the amazing folds and contours of this, the top of this mushroom. So yeah, so this is the mushroom form of this fungus really only lasts about 24 hours. So it's a really quick process from when this emerges up out of the ground and then goes through this pretty big transformation from being when it first comes up before it has opened up out into this sort of parasol shape. It's covered with little, it's called flocculation, but what looks like fur, you can see it in the center. There's a little bit left in the reference picture. You can see what's left, but as it then opens up into more of an umbrella shape, that flocculation disappears and it starts to decay essentially. And so eventually all of the top of this mushroom is going to turn into a black inky liquid. And so that's why they're called ink caps. And again, it happens all really quickly, just within the space of a day. And so right now this one has already started to sort of decay into its ink. And that's why these lines have started to get so beautiful and dark.
Now I just have to ask if you've tried if the ink is something you've tried playing with at all with paper.
So I have spotted these once in my neighborhood. So the one that I spotted in Cold Canyon, I was definitely not going to mess with to take home and let it turn into ink. I spotted them once in my neighborhood, but they were too far decayed for me to feel like I could pick them and do that. So no, I have definitely not actually gotten to play with the ink myself. But there are definitely some great examples out there on the internet of people who have done so if you go looking for that.
Yeah, we had a fabulous demo which we can post to on creating pigments with mushrooms over the summer, which was a lot of fun.
Yes, that was a wonderful demo. I really enjoyed watching it.
Can you share what sketchbook you're using too?
Oh yeah, so this is definitely a bigger sketchbook than what I would take out in the field. This is a, but the paper is kind of similar to what I might use in the field. So it's a Strathmore colored pencil pad. Again, I'm using a nice big one for this, for the purposes of doing a virtual demo. I usually use smaller sketchbooks. I'm not picky about paper. I usually don't use nice thick watercolor paper. I usually use fairly thin paper. I just prefer a sketchbook full of thin pages, and I'm not going for, perfect watercolor effects in them in the field. So yeah, so this is as thick of paper as I would ever use in the field. For completed illustrations, absolutely, I use fancy watercolor paper at home, but I don't enjoy that nearly as much out in the field. I also like that I can carry a sketchbook full of many, many more pages that way too when it's thinner paper.
I found too that my field sketches are so quick that I appreciate the faster drawing time of lighter weight paper also, where I really, if I've got time and I'm deliberately setting out to do a watercolor, I love a heavier, 140-pound watercolor, such as the arches. But otherwise, that quick drying time, for those of us who don't live in deserts, can be really helpful. I have a question from Lisa. How tall is this mushroom? Can you give us a sense of scale?
Oh, yeah. So this is, I would say it was about 7 or 8 inches tall. It was a pretty tall, really delicate, but a pretty tall mushroom. Maybe that's a little bit too much. Maybe more 5 to 6 inches.
And we have another fabulous question that I think I want to mention to them too. I'm looking at Phoebe B. Peabody, that we have a lot of other demos on our website, but Phoebe B. Peabody's asking about learning more drawing techniques. They're trying to draw something every day and feels that they're floundering with some technique. So do you have any tips on learning how to sketch and some of the practice?
Yeah, well, I don't know that I necessarily have specific advice other than there are so many amazing things available out on the internet. Like Maria just said with other demos, poking around online, so many people have offered up so much wonderful content for free. And then there's even more content, paying for people's courses, but there's just a lot of great example and instruction out there online. And then I also just can't say enough about jumping in and doing it. The idea of having a daily practice, so that you are, just spending a huge amount of time experimenting without putting the pressure on yourself to produce perfect results every time, but truly just putting in that time practicing, is huge. And absolutely things like the project that I took on, where I had something specific that I was following. And so I had, this huge motivation to get out there frequently and just draw. And again, so much of it was for, record keeping and keeping track for myself and my own memory of what I was seeing as I was out there. And so that really can take the pressure off of producing perfect drawings every time. When you know that you're going to be keeping on doing them, there will always be more, and you're always going to turn the page and keep going. And also remembering to set things aside right after you've drawn them and don't make judgments about them right away, and come back and look at them later, because the way that you perceive and judge your own work changes dramatically as long as you give yourself a little bit of time after drawing it.
Yeah, yes to all that. A little pause can do wonders. And I have a question with your ongoing project with the Cold Canyon. Did you see a shift in your own practice or what you were noticing and during your repeated visits, from sort
Yeah,
of the sketching experience?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I went into it having a lot of drawing experience. This was not, starting out having not drawn a lot beforehand, but I absolutely see a huge difference going from the first drawings in the first sketchbook that I started right after the fire and looking at the most recent drawings that I've done there. Again, just the repetition of doing drawing after drawing, and again, that is just honing your observational skills too. It's of course, increasing the accuracy of what you're seeing and then putting down on the paper, but also just increasing what you're noticing in the first place. And so I definitely see a difference in the quality that I see myself in how much I how much I like my drawings and how much I think that they are representing what I saw when I was out there.
Well, these mushrooms look like such terrific subjects for these contours, really seeing you work your way around the lines and outlines. Looks like really they're almost more meditative subjects of getting to find the pattern, huh?
Yes, they're sort of a perfect illustration of how you can let really let the texture of the subject sort of drive the entire thing. And I mean, and they're really perfect because they've got these built-in contour lines themselves, and so you can really see exactly how each fold is happening because it's all actually outlined in these beautiful lines of ink. So they're a really satisfying subject. And it's not always this obvious, but I do try to be really, I mean, I would say probably the two things that I pay the most attention to when I'm drawing are, I mean, that sort of let me convey the shape of whatever it is, are the textures that I see on it, and things like the contrast between these particles of flocculation that are left in the middle of the mushroom, and these wonderful lines of texture. So all the different contrasts of texture on what I'm drawing, and then also the way the shadows fall on it help really show its shape, both just for me observing what its shape is. And then also when I do the drawing, if I then put those textures and those shadows into my drawing, it makes a huge difference in that drawing coming to life and being three-dimensional.
Yeah, one of my mantras is just make my darks dark. Those dark areas help the light ones pop and um, add that dimension.
Yeah, absolutely. And brush pens are fantastic for that. And
Um,
I find, yeah, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say we've got some questions too in the chat about some of the other tools you might use in the field. You're demonstrating today with the Pentel brush pen, but you mentioned that it's not a pen you might use as frequently for other subjects, that it's just really well suited to the mushrooms. Can you share some of your other tools that you've enjoyed using in the field?
So yeah, so I don't necessarily want to give the impression that I'm actually thinking that much about suiting tools to subjects in the field.
Mm-hmm.
For this demo, I definitely am thinking about that. Much more, my choices of what I'm using in the field are much more informed really by how much time I'm expecting to spend on my sketches, because I found that when I try to draw really fast with a brush pen, I find it much more challenging because it's so easy to, at least for me, to hit the dark aspects really hard with the brush pen. And it's really important, I think, for the brush pen to be effective to also have a lot of really delicate lines. And when I'm trying to draw things quickly, I lose the delicate lines for sure. So when I know I'm going to be taking a little bit more time in the field, then I'm more likely to use something like this brush pen. Generally, if I'm moving faster, I'm actually probably more likely to use some sort of a fine line fountain pen. This is a TWSBI Eco, and I love them because they hold huge amounts of ink in their barrel. And so that's probably my most common field sketching tool. I also, because I really, really rely on variable lines for expressiveness and liveliness in my drawings, I also use a Sailor bent nib fountain pen, because it's sort of a nice compromise between being able to draw more quickly but still having a nice variable line. So those are the most common ones. And then I use watercolor the most. I also do carry colored pencils sometimes, but I also don't always feel obligated to even add color while I'm in the field, because definitely my greatest interest is in the lines and not as much in the color. So sometimes I do just line work in the field. Sometimes I add color later from photographs. And sometimes I don't add color at all.
Yeah, I love having a little shorthand I'll sometimes use for color notes to myself, or just have a practice of noticing color and kind of talking about it in my head of what colors they are to make it easier to add later. I'll tell you about one fail though, was when I caught myself using like an S and realized I had like shadow and sun and snow. And I was like, look, I got to get more specific with these.
Yes, I think it's really great to have a variety of different strategies for not feeling like you have to capture absolutely everything. You're not doing a full, complete, finished landscape painting every time you pick up your sketchbook in the field. And so color notes are wonderful. Just using black and white is wonderful. Giving yourself little assignments like, I'm just going to record the colors I'm seeing. I'm not even worrying about shapes and lines. All of those are really great strategies.
Oh, I love that color one. And those of you following us on social media and our newsletter may have seen Lisa Spangler did a really fun series on like color spots, creating little just spots of color, which inspired me for thinking about our sense of place. Oh, look how that mushroom is really coming together with all of your line work there, Robin.
Yeah, so I'm gonna add color in a minute. Because this is a brush pen, it will take a little bit longer to dry. I'm not sure. Yeah, you can see I've been smudging it already. So I'm gonna wait just a minute to add color. I don't worry that much about ink running into my color. That's fine in the field when I'm working in a hurry, but I'll give this a little bit of time. I'm just situating the mushroom in its environment here by adding some of those grasses that I see behind it. I'm only going to draw two of the mushrooms on this handout, but I thought, especially if people are drawing from this later, it would be fun to have all these different views of the mushroom because it just looks amazing from all these different directions. But I think that I will go and do some color in the first one. One of the things that sorry, I keep wanting to point to things on my reference picture, and I know you can't see it on my screen, but actually, I guess I could show it. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on, this mushroom was truly glowing in the sun, and there's just this beautiful yellowy gold color in here that's subtle, but that is really important, I think, for communicating the light and the sort of the drama of this image. And so I'm going to start with that in color because I don't want to miss that. And I'm going to do this in two phases. I'm going to let my colors mix on here, but I'm going to put in some nice golden yellow. And then I'm going to just add on my page a little bit of red. That might have been too much. We'll see. And let that just blend and give it just a second to dry a little bit on the page. But then I'm not going to completely let it dry because I do want it to blend a little bit into the shadow colors. But then the rest of what I'm going to do on these mushrooms, and in fact, there's a little bit of that. I'm going to give the other ink another minute to dry. But really what I'm going to do for the rest of the color on these is to just bring the shadows that I'm seeing that are both cast by the mushroom and then cast on the mushroom by the leaves around it. Again, to help really make the form three-dimensional here. And also, again, give the, convey just how dramatic the lighting was in this.
And Robin, we've got a lot of curiosity about what colors are in your palette. Maybe
absolutely.
hold it up a little closer to the camera too. We can.
I meant to say that to begin with. So,
great. And I'll update the description after this demo with the colors for everybody. So if you miss this, just check back later.
So these are also, just to say, these are all cut from Daniel Smith paint sticks, which was not some grand plan on my part. It just happened that my local art supply store was having a really good sale on these paint sticks, and it was a really great economical way to get a bunch of colors. And I found that I think they're great in travel palettes. They stick in just fine, and they're great for getting color out of. So this is quinacridone red, Hansa yellow medium, burnt umber, cobalt blue, cerulean blue chromium, and cobalt teal blue. And the colors were selected partly just based on the colors that were available. I use a bunch of different colors in a bunch of different settings, but I find this set of 6 to be really, really well-rounded. And it was also a nice chance to decrease my dependence on ultramarine blue because I tend to use that all the time in everything. And so it's been really nice to use a bunch of different blues instead. And also I have found that my absolute favorite purple that I've mixed ever anywhere is with quinacridone red and the cobalt teal blue. I think it makes an absolutely gorgeous purple that we'll use in a little bit for painting the butterflies and the lupine that I'm also going to demonstrate.
Let's say those just one more time for me. Quinacridone red, Hansa yellow medium,
burnt umber, cobalt blue, cerulean blue chromium.
Oh, that's a favorite of mine.
Yeah, it's really good. And then cobalt teal blue.
Got it. I'll get that in the chat for everybody too.
So for the shadows, I am going to actually clean out what's on here just a little bit. I don't worry about perfectly clean mixes by any stretch, but I'm really going to play up just how sort of beautiful and purpley the shadows look here. And again, I think I'm going to start out with that purple mix with the cobalt teal blue and quinacridone red. And it had a little bit of other stuff in there, so it's maybe not quite as glowing as I would expect it to be, but that's great for these shadows. And so I also, again, try to let the paint do a whole lot of, mixing and playing itself on the paper once once I'm putting it down. And so I do want to take advantage of that yellow being able to spread a little bit into the shadow and again help really look like that nice glow that I'm seeing there. I'm going to let the color of the shadow itself change some. Oops, that's really thick. As I go, because that also helps things just look more lively to me. So I'm letting the shadow get purpler.
We've got a question about where you might find these ink cap mushrooms.
Oh, so
Like
they're,
what kind of habitat? Mm-hmm.
yeah, they are. They live in leaf litter and soil. Apparently, at least this species is around deciduous trees specifically. But they also have discovered they like wood mulch and bark chips. So you definitely can find them in more urban and suburban neighborhoods too. So like I said, I did see them in my neighborhood once, but have also seen them out in natural areas. Um, but but yeah, I mean the real barrier to spotting them is really this 24 hours that the mushroom is actually visible and available above ground and then decays again right after that. So they're not out there for long, but right after rains, in decomposing leaf litter or in wood chips is the best place. So then I'm also going to look on the stem. I see some really nice cast shadows. So the mushroom itself is casting a shadow down its stalk, excuse me, stalk, not stem. And then I also see some nice shadows further down from some of the grass and maybe some other things growing there. So I'm going to put those onto the stalk too. Another way of, yeah, go ahead.
So of folks observing that the mushrooms look really delicate and sort of tips on kind of communicating that delicacy and it seems to me that beginning with your line work is part of that and maybe I don't know, emphasis on the shadow. What do you think?
So yeah, I definitely would say that I first off rely on the line work for delicacy, and that's what I love about anything that does a variable line. Is it's especially if you can not lose the delicate aspects of that line too, then the contrast between the darker, heavier areas and the delicate areas helps a lot with making this look sort of delicate and fragile. In this case, because it's also pretty translucent, being able to indicate the light glowing through it and the contrast between light and shadow, I think help with delicacy. I think those are the main things. I think the stalk is actually a bit fat on this one. That super slender stalk might have helped a little bit more in showing delicacy as well. But that's a great question. Great things to keep in mind. So again, I love the cobalt teal blue for mixing all sorts of things, and I definitely love it for greens too. And I'm going to start with my yellow and the cobalt teal blue, and you can see the ink isn't totally dry here, but that's fine. And then also because I like to make sure that I'm sort of varying my colors, I'm now going to add some of the cerulean blue to the green, and not be shy about putting the colors directly on the page, both some mixed and then some independently, adding the yellow independently too to just help show the glowing light there. Here,
I think that can be a really effective technique to keep things from looking too flat, is if you can put more than one color in an area instead of one green having a couple colors mixed together.
Yes, absolutely. And something else I'm not going to do now for time, but you can also absolutely, to highlight just how sort of beautiful and translucent the top of the mushroom is, putting some color behind it will help highlight that too. And even, potentially seeing some of that color reflected through is another option as well.
Do you have
So
a
I'm,
typical
yeah, go ahead.
time you spend on field sketches, like when you go out, like with your cold canyon journals?
So yeah, especially when I'm out trying to draw as many things as possible, I'm spending 2 or 3 minutes on a sketch and not adding color for sure. Not spending anywhere near as long as this on most of my sketches. And then letting a few things that really stood out to me. So like on this visit, maybe this mushroom, to spend a little bit more time on, but never more than like 10 minutes on any one thing, usually because there's just so many things that I want to make sure that I get a chance to record, that I'm not willing to spend huge amounts of time on any one thing. So I'm definitely exaggerating it some, but I also see some of that glowing yellow in the top view of the mushroom. And so I'm going to do the same thing with this one, and maybe experiment with a slightly different purple by bringing in some cobalt blue. But again, use the shadow to really help define the form and just the amazing curls that I see. And if I'm not getting it exactly, that's okay. I don't expect I don't expect a perfectly faithful representation of what I'm seeing, but I do try really hard to think before I start drawing and while I'm drawing about what the most important things to me are that I'm seeing. And in this case, it's definitely the glowing light and the really sculptural um, shapes of this. And so capturing those without being completely consumed by getting everything completely accurate is definitely the most important thing.
It's interesting to me that you go in first with shadows on your sketches, and with watercolor, bigger paintings, the tendency is to work from big shapes, light values to dark values. Do you find this saves you time with kind of initiating that dimension or capturing light, or just an approach you've just found you enjoyed?
Well, this is probably not a great representation of the way I normally work in watercolor, because I wouldn't necessarily start with shadows if it weren't the fact that I'm really only using shadows on these mushrooms. And so I didn't necessarily explain that, but because I'm not really the mushroom is pretty white. I certainly could add some color there, but I'm not. I'm just leaving it white, to really increase the contrast between the shadowed and the lit glowing areas. And so I really probably almost never truly start with shadows. I would do probably the color of the object first and then shadows if it were anything other than this.
Robin, we've got a nice question from Mary about techniques for sort of nature sketching for folks who might not have as much time to go, out in the world as much. If using photos or finding photos for inspiration, or using like guidebooks for kind of learning and practicing. Do you have any thoughts there?
Yes, lots and lots of thoughts. So I absolutely think, well, I mean, it's two things. One is because I did focus on this natural area, it definitely gives the impression that I always go, to exciting natural areas to draw. But I think it's so incredibly important to also learn about and know about everything around you as soon as you leave your front door. What is around you? Because there's nature all around us, and it's really important to interact with that too. So I do a huge amount of sketching really close to home, and that's just fundamental to everything that I do. And so that's definitely the first thing, which is that I strongly encourage not feeling like you need to go somewhere far away and exotic to sketch. And then the other thing is, yes, absolutely. I draw from photos all the time. I draw from photos that I've taken. I draw from photos online. I draw from photos in books. And I think it's a really, really important way to learn about what things look like. Going back to that question earlier, to learn about, various species that you might eventually see out in the field or that you might not. But I think that, you know, drawing in general, drawing nature, I think, of course, there's no substitute for actually drawing things out in nature, but there is no reason to feel like you have to be limited to only that. And I think it's important to make use of as many different ways of learning about species and what they look like and how to draw them, making use of as many different sources as you can.
Oh, I agree 100%, Robin. And I'll share that probably about 10 or more years ago, one of my personal naturalist projects was just to want to learn more about birds. So every day I'd look up birds, I'd go to the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, I'd pull out guides, and I'd do a sketch of the bird and then just write notes about it. And I think before I ended that project, I had about 70 that I did. And it was immensely satisfying. And it's really helped my continued attention to birds. And just using all the photos I would find to put together a little bit of a composite in my own learning. And I'd love to continue that kind of project with trees or, things found for me along my beaches. It's a nice way to connect with the world around you.
Yeah, I think it's so important. And it also gives you a huge amount of important background on what things do look like when you see them out in the field. And it makes it so much easier to interpret what you're seeing and to turn it into a satisfying drawing when you sort of know what to expect, because it's very much the repetition of drawing these same things that increases your facility with being able to draw them again. I've now drawn inkcap mushrooms a whole bunch of times, and I draw butterflies all the time and lupines all the time. And that then makes it easier and quicker for me to draw them in the field in the future. And it also really, really helps me have sort of ideas and questions about what I'm seeing when I see them each time that I wouldn't necessarily have before. And so it really deepens the types of observations that I can make about them too.
Can you share what your average little day pack or hip pack or whatever you use looks like when you go to the field? What are your essentials?
So yeah, I truly have what I've got here, which is, well, I don't have a water brush with me, but I mean, it's usually almost always just plus something to wipe my brush on, and it's usually a water brush, but that's it. Paper and pen and one brush and paint. And there are, of course, sometimes variations on that, but that's really usually just about it. I take binoculars. Sometimes I take a hand lens most of the time. How much I actually use those things varies widely. I often am so transfixed with there's so many things to draw every time, and I never get around to drawing everything I want to, and it's just always feels like a mad rush. So I'm giving the butterflies a minute or two to dry, but I included, it's a blurry photograph. So you're obviously not from this drawing a super detailed butterfly. And I wanted this to represent more what I might be trying to do in the field with things that are moving and that are not going to hold still for me to do a perfectly detailed photograph. And so and also, of course, I'm not a photographer, and this is the best time ever going to get of things that are moving. But it's a great way of duplicating what things are going to be like in the field, which is, basing it on the many butterflies I've drawn in the past. I have a general idea of how they're constructed in the different shapes that they're making as they fly or as they rest. And so I watch them as much as I can while I see them go by, and then I draw them afterwards from memory, usually, essentially, and am not trying to get details, just trying to get the overall shape that their body is making when I saw them. And so that's sort of what I'm trying to represent here. And what I also like about this picture is often this is the only way that I'm able to capture butterflies with a camera, which is when they are mud pedaling, when they are down on the ground in damp or muddy soil, getting moisture and nutrients from that soil. And so it's a great thing to capture because it's such an important, little ecological detail. And it's a time when they're sometimes holding more still too, which is nice.
I found on
So
one
yeah.
project, I'm not a great photographer either, but I was sketching birds really interested in Arctic terns. And so I would take little
Hmm.
videos of them also, and then just pause my videos to get their wings in different positions when I was later working in the studio, and was a fun way to use my less than professional photography equipment to capture sort of some additional info.
Yeah, that is a fantastic idea. And another nice way to, obviously, if you have your own videos, that's lovely, but also just using videos that you find online too can be great ways to practice for field sketching, because then not only are you getting the static pose of whatever it is that you're watching, but you're getting a sense of how it moves, which is going to really help you once you're out in the field and are seeing things, actually moving around. That's a great way to get um, really good experience with the way they're going to behave in nature.
Well, Robin, what's coming up for you? What projects do you have going on that you're excited about that you can share with us?
Oh yeah, so well, I have dreams of writing lots more books. There's more that I want to explore with fire ecology. Potentially expanding. In the Cold Canyon Fire Journals, I definitely expanded what I was learning to other California ecosystems, and what this means in the broader sense for climate change. But I would like to do some more detailed studies of other environments and how they respond to fire. This one was focused on mostly chaparral and oak woodlands in California. So I have more that I'm interested in doing with fire ecology. I also there's some other really important ecosystems in California that I want to explore more, like the high altitude bristlecone pine ecosystems in California, for example. And I'm also super interested in water in California's central and especially San Joaquin Valley, and exploring what it means for the water to be disappearing and for the land to be sinking. And so I've got far more things that I want to explore than I have time for sure. But I'm really excited to apply everything that I learned about using field sketching as a primary communication tool. To applying that to all of these other topics that I'm really interested in.
Oh yes, you're getting your palette out. I think we probably got just enough time. We can splash our final color on, and then want to be sure to let people know where we can continue to follow your work.
Yeah, fantastic. So I have my two primary places would be my website, robinleecarlson.com, and then I post to Instagram a lot. And my handle there is at Anthropocene Sketchbook. And there's a link to that on my website too, because that's a little bit easier to find.
And we've got both in the comments or in the description of this video as well, so you can find that. And I'll say that anyone who does any sketches inspired by today, if you want to post them in your stories or in your feeds, to tag us. So we love to see what you've done as well. Or of course, always love to follow everybody's work also, where you can tag us at Art Toolkit anytime. And Robin, do you have any other adventures coming up, big or small?
Well, I not necessarily anything beyond sort of the topics that I just talked about. Definitely getting out into other ecosystems sort of regularly, the way that I've been able to do in Cold Canyon is a goal. But I am also very much still regularly visiting Cold Canyon, because I still am just super fascinated with what's going to keep happening there as more time passes since the fires. Um, so so yeah, just getting outdoors as much as possible.
Well, everything you're looking at is just so topical with what we've been experiencing with our changing climate. So I'm excited to see what you keep doing there, Robin.
Yeah, it's both both sort of fills me with hope and with fear, absolutely, because Cold Canyon, of course, actually burned again during the course of this project. And so I have certainly found myself, in this cycle of climate change and drought and increasing fires. And so being able to interpret that through the lens of field sketching and artwork and using that to feel really connected to this particular place helps me gain perspective. And again, that leads to both hope and fear for sure. But to help me understand what's going on with other places throughout California and the West and the rest of the world as well.
Well, your sketch is beautiful, really, and I love how much in just this short time you were able to complete, and it's just such a nice example of what is possible just going out in the world. Robin, let's just pull up just to say for a little closing. I'll give you a little peek at my little sketches too, but
fantastic!
Something you said that I really appreciated was around the hope we can feel, and that I think a sketching practice too. It's a practice of attention and care. And I, it's sort of impossible for me not to have some optimism in my worldview because there's just
it's critical.
So much beauty and community and creativity, but in feeling that practice of attention is a way to sort of celebrate and honor and raise awareness for things around us. And so really appreciate the work that you're doing and sharing. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. Your drawings were beautiful. I didn't get to see them for very long, but those were gorgeous.
One more
thank
little
you for
peek.
drawing. Oh, thank you. Oh, that's gorgeous. That's gorgeous. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I mean, just seeing how many things are absolutely surviving and thriving right after a fire is a completely world-changing experience.
Well, everyone who joined us today, thank you so much. We'll have the recording up if you'd like to follow more. We have also additional free demos on our website, as well as workshops. The best place to hear about what's coming up with us at Art Toolkit is to sign up for our newsletter. That's at the bottom of our website, or also following us on social media. You'll hear about what's going on as well. You'll just hear about it first on the newsletter. But really appreciate you all, appreciate you, Robin, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you.